emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and,
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 1100.JG0512, certificate number 37232. Deborah Sampson.
So it's 4th of July season here in the United States in 2020. Futurelings may well remember that the 4th of July is the anniversary of our nation's liberation from the tyranny of British rule.
Kind of.
Sort of.
The original vote on the Declaration of Independence passed on July 2nd. Many people didn't sign it until later in the summer.
Why did we pick the 4th? Was it the day we had a quorum? Enough people had signed it that it became effective?
On the 4th, the Declaration of Independence, the wording was approved, but Continental Congress had already voted on the resolution for independence on July 2nd unanimously, and John Adams wrote home to his wife, "The second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epocha in the history of America."
Oh, how wrong he was. 2 days later.
2 days off.
2 days later.
It's not so bad.
No, well, especially given how slow information moved, how slowly information moved in 1776.
It's just a made-up holiday to sell fireworks and corn.
Not true. It's a holiday to celebrate our liberty and our freedoms, but also, you know, you're an American
also watermelon,
patriot, right? Well, yeah, and fireworks. Let's be honest.
Not any of the cool ones anymore. I think it's quite possible that future listeners have no idea why you would set aside a day for your nation state. But it's pretty common.
Although it is common, right?
Yeah.
Independence Day for nations that are independent, it really stands. Canada has an Independence Day. Mexico celebrates a different Independence Day than Cinco de Mayo.
Yeah, that's not the Mexican version.
No.
They celebrate what? It is independence related. The Grito de Dolores, the priest who rings the bell.
The priest who rings the bell. That's
pretty good.
That's one of the great Emmanuel films too.
We just have a bunch of guys in stockings and wigs.
Right.
And they don't do anything active.
Did you ever consider joining the military? It would seem, given your upbringing, that potentially would have been an option, given that you were a loyal and dutiful American, corn-fed.
No, I was never really tempted. I mean, growing up on or near army bases when we lived in South Korea, nothing about that lifestyle really seemed like it was for me. Just at the bare lifestyle minimum of somebody telling you what you have to do every minute of the day. I mean, that's a kind of structure that helps a lot of people that wind up in the military.
Right.
Like they thrive there. That is, I think I would chafe there.
Did you, when you were young, chafe against authority?
Oh, absolutely. I have to work against my own tendency toward contrarianism. Like I have to be a contrarian on contrarianism, you know, like when part of my brain is like, shut up, you can't tell me what to do. I have to be like, shut up. You know, I have to double contrarian it.
And how were you successful in school? Were you already controlling your contrarianism then?
Well, in school, you think of it as temporary, right? You think if I excel here, they'll let me out of here. It's not true of the military.
So you had a strategy. I mean, it's not true of the military, although if you excel there, you get more authority.
You get more, yeah.
It takes a long time.
Do you get more autonomy? No, right?
No, but it takes a really long time for that authority to become real, right? And for a lot of the time, you're kind of an intermediary. As you go up in rank and experience, I think people turn to you more.
Is my idea of the military right? That people sometimes less competent than you are constantly are giving you structure and orders that are, I mean, depending on how competent you feel you are, I think that's probably... How different is it than any kind of corporate... I guess I've just described corporate life also.
Yeah, although I think the military is one of the premises is that parts are interchangeable. So
just like corporate life.
but even more so, like the idea being that you should be able to take any lieutenant and put them in any job, and the duties would be understandable to them. They would be able to conduct their duties and then move on to another job. It's a wartime model where you need that. You need it.
If somebody blows up on a gun, somebody else is to immediately fill in.
Yeah, it's completely opposed to the idea that any one person is unique, has unique skills, and we need this one person. They're the only one that can do it. It's based around the idea that this set of jobs can be done by anyone of this rank.
So it was just a recognition of my own extraordinary nature, I guess, that caused me to rule out the military.
Unique flower.
Like all Dr. Spock raised babies, I was sure that I was an irreplaceable ray of sunshine.
Right. Can you imagine being in a situation where you were doing a great job somewhere and there was a knock on the door and there was somebody standing in the doorway that was wearing the same rank as you, and they were like, I'm here to take over and you're gone now. And you were like, but here, let me tell you
here's how the spreadsheet works.
And they're like, no, I got it. Thanks. You know, like you have 2 hours to explain it to me and then you're gone.
I'm envisioning even worse scenario where like you actually figure out ways to improve the efficiency and performance of your duty, whatever it is, and are told, no. Have you not looked at the manual?
No, this is a standardized procedure and your innovations are...
The problem with your innovations is that they're good.
Right. Well, and they're going to create problems because now we're going to have to change it all across the board, and we don't have the resources or time to do that.
Exactly. And I feel like of all the problems with capitalism, that is innovation and efficiency are not often chafed at in that way. Even bottom-up innovation and efficiency are often embraced.
Well, in American, the American fantasy of meritocracy suggests that unique people with unique talents are worth a lot more, are prized, and their innovative natures and their rascally self-determination, like those are that's the cream that rises to the top that we're also fond of.
It might depend on what the skill is. If you're a really good NFL place kicker, that's probably true.
Well, and I think it's the difference between being talented and being a good manager, right? Because if you're the best machinist in a shop, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be the best manager. And
it might go the other way. You might be an impossible cog in the machine if you're aware of your talent.
Right. And so that becomes then a question of what is the opportunity for advancement in a situation where you're the best at something, but that job has a pay ceiling or a authority ceiling, right? You don't in a shop, they don't have maybe always the opportunity to make someone a master smith.
And even off hours, the military regiments you in a way that no other job really does.
Well, what the military has also is, you get promoted. One of the components of promotion is just time served. Like if you've been in the military and doing a competent job for X number of years, you should be at X rank. So it isn't, there absolutely is a component where you can get promoted early if you're great, and you can not get promoted if you're really failing. But just the idea, kind of like school, that
Pretty much everyone graduates?
or that everybody that's 10 years old is in 5th grade, right? So everybody that's been in the Army X number of years is at that rank. And that is, again, it works against the idea that that you could excel and just totally outpace everybody, right? Zuckerberg is a billionaire in his 20s. That's not going to happen in the U.S. Army.
I also have to admit, I imbibed the kind of, I don't even know where this would have come from. Not my parents, who both came from military families, but just this idea that America now has a class-based military.
Right.
And unless something has gone wrong in your life, you don't enlist. I mean, it's a career of last resort now. It's not something to be aspired to anymore, which was not been true for any other part of human history, really.
I mean, but the military has always been, in almost every nation and time in the world, almost 100% class-based. And that's been a huge problem for armies throughout the centuries, because the officers are often not very good strategists or military thinkers, but they come from aristocratic classes. And, you're poor and enlist at a low grade. And, the military is already very stratified. But if you add in a class and wealth element to that stratification, it's not always the best way to fight a war.
But we've also, in this country, we've kind of lost the idea that the military is a sparkling career for a promising young person of means.
Yeah. Well, and I think we lost that somewhere along the line, and it was great that we had lost it. I mean, even in the American experience was, from the Revolutionary War on, one where you could break that aristocratic class ceiling. I mean, General Grant, right, made a great career for himself, and on the strength of his military victories,
gift, yeah.
right? And that was true. That worked against the kind of global tendency to have the scions of wealthy families be the officer corps. The American military was a place that the potential for meritocracy was there. Now, what's gone is that the callow sons and daughters of the mid-century capitalist class no longer think it's a glamorous enough job, because they're all artists.
There's no prestige to it.
Right. No prestige. And I mean, we live in a world.
No matter how many Army commercials you see during football games, they're not going to convince you that.
And partly it is that we don't grant the military that much social power. And I'm saying that as someone in Seattle. Now, if we were living in Biloxi or even Atlanta.
Did you say Biloxi like 2 syllables? Biloxi. Is that how they say it in Mississippi?
Biloxi.
Mississippi. Everything loses a syllable.
It does.
It's Mississippi.
Get there.
Biloxi. What if there's a 1-syllable word? You just don't say it?
Books. I think it is part of the cultural divide in this country that we see more and more, is that if you're a graduate of the University of Alabama and come from a well-to-do family down there, you may consider a career as a military officer to be more of a social, even necessity than somebody would.
It certainly wouldn't be unaccountable. It shouldn't, because up here you would really think, boy, what happened? What kind of breakdown happened in this young person's life where after college they became a military officer?
People still fill those graduating classes at the Naval Academy and at West Point. So they're and Virginia Military Academy, right? There's still a culture of military that is now more and more geographical, and one could argue that there's a class element to it that is regional. Right, the difference between what's considered upper class in Virginia and what's considered upper class in
And
Oregon.
it's a split between red and blue America that we don't often think about.
We don't think about it from here because we're the liberal elite that makes the media.
Well, and plus on paper, we would be like, no, we respect the military as much as anyone. But no, it impacts our culture in a very different way.
Super different way. And weirdly, considering how much military there is in the Northwest, how much, how many bases there are here, how many enlisted people.
The insularity of the culture probably contributes to that. It doesn't matter how many military people there are in Bremerton. You're not hanging out with them.
Well, no, we don't go to Bremerton unless we're forced.
Some of this must be a post-Vietnam phenomenon, right? Is that what compromised America's default cultural respect for military culture?
That, and I think Vietnam set it in motion, but it was the period in the 80s, I think, the Reagan administration, the Pride is Back era, where there was an attempt to bring that kind of post-World War II collective feeling of patriotism and connect it to the military. And that attempt, the side effect was that it politicized the idea that if you believed in the red, white, and blue, and you believed in Chevy trucks, then you joined the military, and if you didn't, then you were a communist. And that dynamic's always been in the United States, but it was never directly connected to.
I forgot to mention the other reason why I didn't consider the military is because I'm a communist.
Right.
I mean, that's one of the. I assume that's one of the first questions they ask.
The futurelings all know that. Futurelings who are living in a Marxist utopia. I'm sorry, a Trotskyist utopia.
Trotskyist utopia.
But joining the army has always been a way for people to. Throughout history, a way for people to leave their small town, to go out into the world, to have economic opportunity. It's a place where people that had nowhere else to go went. At the French Foreign Legion, for example, but people would join the army and see the world, but also join the army and potentially survive the famine. Join the army and put your dark past behind you. And prior to very recently, when records were not kept very efficiently and information didn't travel as fast as it does, you really could escape into the military. Often join a roving band of mercenaries and never return to your small town. It was the military provided an opportunity in a way that it still does now, but an additional opportunity to really escape into a fog and
the fog of war.
The fog of war,
as it were.
But really, truly remake yourself in setting out for the frontier. But it was,
and it still has that function today among the kind of people who are, a lot of people join the military because it's a way out of whatever their community is.
Right.
It's a fresh start of whatever kind of dead end they feel like they're in. Still true today.
It is, yeah. The only downside is that the military keeps scrupulous records now.
Yes.
So
there's certain kinds of trouble you cannot get out of.
Right. They don't want you if you're. I mean it's a tension, I think, within the military because they want warm bodies, but they don't want.
Sure, those recruiting targets are getting harder and harder to hit.
Right, but they don't want problems either, and so. I think in the old days, there was a sense that you could, if you were a juvenile delinquent, you'd join the military and straighten yourself out, or they'd straighten you out. I think the Army now doesn't want to be tasked with straightening out juvenile delinquents, so they make it a little harder.
You need to join a roving band of mercenaries for that. You can become a white hat hacker, or
that's what happened to me. I mean,
what was your roving band of mercenaries?
I should have
a rock band.
Yeah, I should have joined the military and gotten straightened out. But instead, I joined a roving band of mercenaries that invented indie rock.
Were your parents disappointed when you chose indie rock over the military?
No, I mean they were disappointed that I chose indie rock, but not over the military. They would have been more disappointed. My dad wouldn't; he was a veteran, but my mom was against the idea.
Well, it's hard for moms I mean, you're imagining your little boy or girl. I mean, maybe you're not even imagining them in combat, but you're just imagining them in basic training, if nothing else. You're like, oh, no, I don't think that seems very respectful at all to treat my son that way. I'm going to write them a note.
Yeah, please treat my little boy a little bit better.
Please excuse John from push-ups today. He's very delicate.
But this escape route, this opportunity, this opportunity to express patriotism, but also the opportunity to conduct the business of being a soldier, which is its own kind of business that appeals to that appeals broadly to people. And you suggested it earlier, the order, but also the kind of hands-on mechanical work of soldiering. It's very knowable. It isn't, no one gets into soldiering because it's a place to dream.
Right.
Right? It's a very concrete and tactile experience that really does call to people. And it's, most volunteer armies are able to populate themselves with people who treat it as or who think of it as having a real draw for themselves, an emotional draw. But that has not traditionally been available to a whole class of people that we've talked about here on the Omnibus quite a bit. Futurelings may not know what we're talking about, but
I still don't know what we're talking about.
A whole class of people that we call women, or in our increasingly non-binary world, non-male identifying humans.
However little our contemporary listeners understand about women, it's possible that in the distant future they will understand even less.
Although it's, I think, more likely that in the not so distant future, all futurelings will be women, having figured out the very little bit more chemistry we need to figure out to just eliminate men from the equation.
The very small biological component of men is really...
I feel like we have a pretty tenuous grasp.
Yeah, I mean, we're so easy to replace that the fact that we have not yet been replaced is clearly a sign of a top-down conspiracy.
Yeah.
To keep us working
in the sciences, but that's going by the wayside more and more every day.
Yeah, I mean, you how are we 100 years into modern science? We still don't have Wonder Woman Paradise Island yet.
I feel like most of the scientists I know are women now, so they're going to have a solution any day now. They definitely have some seroptimist organization where they're working on it.
Are we going to get like a pink slip in the mail?
No, they'll let us die out. It'll just be.
Oh, we don't get told?
I don't think
Your services are no longer needed.
I don't think so. I think it's pretty clear our services are no longer needed.
I haven't impregnated anybody in well over a decade.
We're just sidelined.
I'm already, I'm not even out to stud. What's worse than that?
But you can imagine, and we see in our lifetimes, the opening up of the American military to women serving in increasingly more active roles. Like there have been women in the U.S. military for many decades, but the idea that they would enter combat was considered absolutely haram until very recently. Women were excluded from combat work, and it was for all the predictable reasons, right? But also for
when it was palatable to say they physically couldn't do it.
Right.
That was that was just well understood by everyone. And when the optics of that changed, the language turned into something about the camaraderie of the Corps.
Actually, I think the camaraderie of the Corps argument predated the physical argument.
Is that true?
Because the suggestion that that women wouldn't be physically capable in combat was just completely secondary to the idea of how disruptive they would be in the barracks. It's always been a question of where are we going to put the showers? It's like all of the bathroom problems that American culture has. How are we going to do the bathrooms?
And that's how you can tell it's ginned up. Because, if you've ever built, or remodeled a house, there's nothing easier than to figure out remodeling a bathroom.
Just put a bathroom or just change the sign on the door or whatever. It's like the showers in MASH, right? Between the following hours, it's for women, and then the men can come.
But you got to make it Hawkeye proof.
Yeah, well, that's right.
That's the
The
problem.
shower can't be a tent, right?
That's an argument against integrating the military. Hawkeye's always like peeking at the nurses.
And the physical argument, the question of whether or not women would be able to handle the rigors of combat, but also the just the strength of being able to pick up a fellow soldier, sling him over your back, and carry him back behind the front lines.
Although again, the importance of that wanes as less and less of military operations rely on physical exertion of any kind.
Right.
I mean, what do you have to bench press to pilot a drone?
And our drone pilot listeners can write Ken at
let me know what you guys can bench.
theomnibusproject@gmail.com. But it's been part of the popular culture in our lifetimes, so much so that it's it's the subject of Demi Moore movies, and
a novelty. Like in the 90s, it was a novelty. Can you imagine what if there was a woman but doing army stuff?
But what's happened is it's now just gradually and increasingly women are active in every role in the military.
It turned out a lot of the fears were unfounded.
Although they're still excluded, from the final curtain of special forces, and there are certain jobs that women still can't perform, but they're fighter pilots, and I mean they have been almost completely integrated.
Last time I read a thing on this, the special forces are also overwhelmingly white to a degree you don't find. So that makes me think there's something about the culture of special forces that is not that has little to do with qualification.
If you look at the culture of the U.S. military, there are huge racial differences just between who is in armor and who is in artillery. Like there are.
It's just weird historical legacies.
Well, and just cultural. It's sort of like it may be that there have been sort of like immigration anchor families that come and then you've got an established set of people in that command and
self-perpetuates.
Yeah, new recruits are drawn there. But talk about a plantation mentality. The U.S. Army has a lot of holdover traditions from long ago that aren't potentially the most progressive.
It's a shame.
And especially given what how diverse the armed forces are, right? How
and they
disproportionately diverse.
And they try to portray themselves as, very progressive in that respect, right? Like we're a place where it's colorblind, opportunities for all.
But the special forces are hicks.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's who you want.
Now, throughout history, so we see now as the military has accepted women, and the American military was late to this game, right? The Israeli army was co-gender from the outset.
You and I are old enough to remember the media panics about every single barrier that fell to women in the military.
Yeah.
But a lot of it does seem fairly normalized now, or at least I hear about it less.
Well, just like everything. I mean, the media panic that we're undergoing right now about non-gendered bathrooms.
Sure.
There's still half the population of the country that feels like it's a sign of the end times. The idea that women they would share barracks or military facilities or rank even with men only 15 or 20 years ago was just as panicky. And now it's like fait accompli. Nope.
Do you have a sense of within military communities? Like, is there still grumbling and service we don't know about?
Oh, there's a lot. I was fortunate enough to be, let's say, drinking, although I wasn't drinking. Everyone else was, at an NCO club at an overseas base and I was standing in a group of Master Chiefs from the U.S. Navy.
From the video game Halo?
From the video game Halo. And there were, a lot of the chiefs were kind of my age or a little younger, but the Master Chief of the base, the senior chief, was a guy that had been in the Navy. He joined the Navy in Vietnam and then left the Navy and came back. And so he was older. He was older than the other chiefs because he decided to become a lifer, but he'd had this period in between.
He took a gap year.
And he was obviously very respected by all the other chiefs. I saw him interact with the officers on that base, and they all were extremely respectful of him. He was a very, very high-ranking enlisted man. And, non-commissioned officer. And he in confidence, but in, loud cigar chomping confidence, said the Navy has been ruined by the presence of women. The reason I'm retiring, even though the reason he was retiring is it was time for him to retire.
He's a Vietnam era veteran.
But he said, I'm retiring. I can't wait to get out because it's all been ruined. Women have just changed it all, and it's just not as good as it ever was. And the military can't do its job anymore. He had all these cliches, and he was saying it with the authority of someone that was used to being right. Mm-hmm. And all the other NCOs were all, ashing cigars on one another and nodding in agreement. So, and I was really surprised by it, given that we were on a base, but we were in this protected space of the NCO club. And so it felt like a clubhouse, but it was as just profoundly, unapologetically sexist as
anachronistic.
You could not have, if you saw it on film, you'd be like, come on, it's not like that anymore. They're just making these guys out to be the bad guys.
I've had that experience with firefighters where they will very candidly tell you these politicians are trying to get women in the ranks and it's just ruins our effectiveness I guess maybe they think they're being outsiders and truth tellers. They don't seem to have any awareness of how that kind of thing sounds today.
I have a firefighter friend in Seattle, and he reports that the culture of firefighters and the police is kind of what it actually is often what the liberal critique of it is. Firefighters and police officers tend to come into the city from the suburbs, and they are politically more conservative, and they are sort of tribal, and that affects their policing. And we see it in the cities. It's why there's often a cultural gulf between police and fire and the citizens they serve in urban environments.
But they do have their own stripe of the flag now, so you can't argue with them.
They do?
They've got that one blue stripe.
There's a blue stripe on the flag?
Have you not seen this police flag?
Oh, I guess so. It's the thin blue line.
Yes. The thin blue line literally now has to be part of the flag. They think they're 1/13 of America.
Well, I ran for city council, as you recall, and the period that I was really engaged in Seattle politics and the degree to which the relationships between local government, the constituency, and cops and fire, I got a super crash course in it.
That's a real hotbed, I guess.
And it was, it's really intense because police and fire are a kind of military, paramilitary side of a culture
that doesn't have that anymore, right?
Right. I mean, a city.
There's got to be a lot of conflict there when we don't think much of that culture and they don't think much of ours.
Right. It's the army of the city, and so you have the civilian oversight and the lack of respect for the civilian government,
and the other way around. The civilians feeling like they outrank these peons who are just grunts.
Right.
The army of the city. That should be the police's new tagline.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
One of the things that I suggested in a couple of those city council meetings was that we make all the police uniforms pink, because the color pink would be restful and would make the police more approachable, and it would also counteract some of the toxic masculinity in it, because I felt like police uniforms were becoming more and more paramilitary all the time, and to have just local cops out there in black combat outfits, ninja outfits, basically just communicated the wrong message, not just to people, but to the cops themselves about what their job was.
I'm not your friend on the beat.
And I was like, put on some pink uniforms with some gold epaulets, like really just embrace, because if you're looking for directions in the city,
Yeah, you're not
every
going to ask
third person's in black fatigues.
Yeah, exactly.
But if there was someone in pink with like a Liberace military uniform,
How'd that go over with the union?
I was not embraced by not only by the cops that I suggested it to. You know, they gave me a sneer, but also the civilian leadership was like, "Listen, take this seriously." And I was like, "I'm 100% serious," and they were like, "I don't think you understand. You're not serious." But there is a long history of women wanting to serve in militaries, and not just in the capacity of nurses or administrators.
Why do they want this historically? What are the trends? Do they have a sense they're getting kept out of a space where there's power and prestige? Do they think they have talents that are going unappreciated?
So because the historical record is often blind, and the further back you go, the blinder it is, but also because it's such a limited subset of people, it's unclear what percentage of people joined the military out of desperation throughout history. You have to guess
It's high.
desperation was a motivator.
You don't want to put that on the form.
No, you don't want to, like, why am I joining? Desperation. There typically wasn't much of a form.
Check all boxes that apply.
But in the examples in history of women who ended up in combat in militaries, there's always a thing that pushes in the commonalities in their stories are surprisingly their stories are all pretty individual, but they're always kind of pushed into it by circumstance. In the case, famously the case of Mulan, who's become a Disney treasure.
We all know how Mulan joined the army.
Mulan is a historical figure that's become a myth.
Yeah. The Chinese folktale may or may not have much in common with what you remember from the movie. But.
Right. But her, every family had to give a son to the army, and her brother had died, and her father was sick.
He's too old.
Too old. That's right. Too old. So she disguised herself as a boy and went off and
to save his life. She was afraid it would be the last time she saw him if he went off to war at his advanced age.
And this disguise yourself as a boy thing is also, in some cases, part of the appeal, because there was a lot of pent up desire to have more options in a sort of traditional culture, and to be able to dress up like a man and become a full citizen, someone that could work any job, someone that could get an education. Like, history is rife with examples of women that decided that it was either easier or preferable or their inclination to just join the masculine world. And it required a subterfuge, right? You weren't able to do it and maintain or invent a gender role that suited you. You had to masquerade. But there are innumerable examples throughout history of women that succeeded in pretending to be men in order to have options.
And in retrospect, do we think of this as a queer space? Is there any kind of LGBT empowerment? Do we tell the story that way now of these women who decided to dress as men?
That kind of revisionism is up to us, right? The historic,
it's tempting.
The record does not include that whole aspect of the story. And so all we can do is speculate. And in a lot of cases, you have to think that someone that is prepared to live her life as a man, often for the rest of her life, is doing so because that is what suits her.
There must have been trans and non-binary people then, although they're not in the record.
Right. And I think in a lot of cultures, there's always been space for trans people and for queer people. It's just that space is often doesn't make it into the historical record because a lot of people are excluded from the record. But also it was a space that was an exclusive space, or a space that was a winked at space, or if you think about the role of transgender people in Mexican culture, like it's a real and respected side culture. It's just not one that you're going to see. It's not, and it's even mainstream. It's just not. It's accepted and not accepted.
It's funny that in cultures where there is no semi-mainstream option like that, it often ends up taking the spaces that seem the least likely, like the military, for example, or naval life or something. These spaces that you would not think of as home to a lot of gender related exploration.
And the military, because it's a hyper-masculine space, is a place where in a way, women who have successfully masqueraded as men are in some ways more likely to get away with it for a while, at least, because of how unlikely it is. Like, it's the last thing anyone expects. And there's a great diversity in human beings. So to look over at your trench mate and they are small or in some high pitched voice in some way seem other. That's true of the person on the other side too. I mean, every soldier is kind of soldiers come from all over, and they're all so different from one another. There is a presumption of maleness, I guess, going into a military context, and that actually works as a beard.
It seems like in movies where this is a device, it seems like the disguises are never particularly convincing on the audience. But the characters are always completely taken in. Yeah,
well, but in movies, a beautiful woman can put her hair up in a bun and put glasses on, and all of a sudden she becomes homely, and everyone agrees, not a sexual
Are you
creature.
saying if they would cast the roles less conventionally, like it would, the masquerade would work?
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, gender is absolutely a continuum, and we all know it, and we see it all the time, right? I mean, from people who are hyper feminine to hyper masculine, there is the great majority of people who are somewhere in between those two poles. And we recognize on another axis as well. It isn't just a XY bell curve. It's
right. There's your
a
internal
Krakatoa.
Identity as well. It's a Krakatoa. Is that
right? It's a mound. We'll call it the gender mound.
It's a mound, yeah.
But our story today revolves around a woman by the name of Deborah Sampson, and it's connected to our Revolutionary War
theme. Well, I forgot about that because we haven't mentioned it for like an hour and a half.
Our 4th of July theme, because Deborah Sampson was a woman in the colonies, pre-Revolutionary War in the American colonies. She was born in the mid 18th century. In Massachusetts.
So the years leading up to the late colonial period.
Late colonial period. And she was one of several children born to not prosperous people. And her father was reputed to have been lost at sea.
Ooh.
And in many histories...
It's romantic.
Yeah, very romantic, except that that further investigation reveals that he was not lost at sea. And in a lot of Deborah Sampson's histories, even now, her father is sort of glossed over as like, and then he was lost at sea, and that left the family destitute.
What does that mean? He's actually with his second family,
He
like
did.
two towns over?
Yeah, the research suggests
Come
that
on, Silas.
he went to Maine and had a separate family, and eventually someone with his name was charged with murder in Maine. But for Deborah Sampson's purposes, he was just gone, an absent father.
He's not in the picture, we say.
And
typically, when we say somebody's spouse or partner is not in the picture, what we mean is he's in Maine murdering people.
That's right.
It's just a euphemism we use.
Like my own grandfather, he went to Maine to murder people. So Deborah Sampson's mother did, what was commonplace at the time, which was send her kids to live with relatives and others. And Deborah Sampson bounced around as a young girl. And in a period where indentured servitude was often the solution, if you were poor and had kids you couldn't provide for, you would put your kid, put your 10-year-old daughter with some helpful neighbors.
Boy, those were the days.
But those helpful neighbors would then put that child to work as a.
It's really frowned on today.
Yeah, although it still happens, boy. It's one of the sad truths of foster care, that some of those kids are not.
Yeah, and there are other parts of the world, of course, where it's
right.
It's still your
commonplace
their ticket out of poverty.
And in the case of Deborah Sampson, it was in some ways a ticket. She was lucky enough to, although working as a domestic, to have to be in situations where, although she wasn't directly taught to read or encouraged to get an education, she was able to procure an education. Partly, it's thought from the other kids in the household who kind of would bring her their schoolwork and kind of tutor her. At some point, she spent some time with an elderly spinster who, it's thought, taught her to read in order to read the Bible to her.
It would have been less normal for a young girl to learn to read than even a boy of her station?
Absolutely. Female education was the scandal of that era. And the idea that you would teach a girl to read or send her to school was political, right? It was socio-political. It was, if you taught your daughter to read, you were some kind of progressive outlier.
Well, at least we've advanced up to firefighting and flying fighter jets.
Yeah, somewhere in there. You have to limit women somehow. Like pick your poison.
I mean, really, once they learn to read, your patriarchy's done.
Yeah.
Like then, whether or not you give them a firefighting axe or not is almost rounding error.
In this case, she, by all accounts, was an extremely capable young person. Like she learned not just to read and write, but also to do all kinds of mechanical work. She was a woodworker. She, learned not just the sort of domestic arts, but was hungry for education and opportunity, and so much so that when she left her indentured servitude, she went to work as a teacher. An uncredentialed one, but at this time, the one-room schoolhouse era. One
of the few respectable careers, right? Professions for a woman.
Right. And one that probably you could perform ad hoc. If there were a bunch of kids and the town threw up a schoolhouse, who are we going to put in here? This 20-year-old girl seems to know how to read.
Yeah, not an age of credentials, right? You could Abraham Lincoln could hold out a shingle without ever going to law, put out a law shingle and never go to law school.
Right. But this also was this era coincided with the beginning of revolutionary fervor in the United States. And then she was present then for the sparking of hostilities.
And what did she think about that? Was she a patriot? Do we know?
She was a patriot and went and attempted to join the Revolutionary Army. Went and was accepted and given a bonus for enlistment, but was recognized by some other young soldier.
Oh, she's disguised.
She disguised herself as a man, called herself Robert Shirtliff.
Robert Shirtliff.
Robert Shirtliff, which is
ironic because a shirtlift is one of the things that can give you away if you're masquerading as a man.
You don't want a shirt lift.
Stay away from the shirt lift.
But she took the name of an uncle, which I think is often happens in these circumstances.
I guess I don't know any of the etiquette for pretending to be a man. I've never had to do it.
Well, what you don't do is go join the army in the town square of a neighboring town, because she was recognized and so had to, and then didn't show up and was sort of counted as a deserter. And because Robert Shirtlift had signed up.
She's tainted her fake identity.
But it was quickly discovered that she had tried to enlist in the army as a woman disguised as a man. And although she repaid most of the money, she was shunned by her Baptist church. It was considered absolutely an
affront against God.
Absolutely an affront against the town and everything. And
specifically the gender swap element of it?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
The deceit of it, but I think
it's a Shakespearean plot device at this point. These people all have Shakespeare. Can't you just be like, I'm doing the whole 12th night thing?
Well, but this is Puritan Massachusetts.
Yeah, maybe you don't have Shakespeare.
And she's Baptist, right? So Baptists have a very different. I read a thing on Instagram yesterday about a friend of mine posted something that like a covenant that a husband and wife would sign together. And each tenet of the covenant was a biblical reference to how a wife cannot deny her husband sex.
Oh, yeah. Mindy and I do that. We sign that.
You sign that yearly?
No, we re-up every night at dinner.
Do you pass a thing around for everyone to sign? But this, this document is basically like, this is the covenant of marriage, and it means that there is no denying sex within marriage. The
covenant, weirdly, is very different for men and women. a lot of people don't know that.
But so at this time, whatever the social censure she experienced, it was real, but it didn't dissuade her. Mm. And so
she's merely a soldier in petticoats.
Yeah, she went and was successful in masquerading as Robert Shirtlift, and was enlisted in the Revolutionary Army.
She signed up again.
She signed up again,
and this time was not recognized. And she joined the 4th Massachusetts Regiment and went to war. She spent 19 months in the Army, was wounded multiple times. At one point, wounded twice in the leg with musket balls. I mean, if you're cross-dressing and you're going to get shot, the leg is definitely what you want.
Although,
if you don't want to get found out,
depends on where on the leg. And in her case, the wound was in a place on her leg where she refused medical treatment
because she was afraid.
She had her head was wounded, and she got her head bandaged, and then went off on her own and removed one musket ball from her leg with a sewing needle and a penknife.
Wow.
The other musket ball was so deeply embedded in her leg that she couldn't get to it, and she lived with it in her leg for the rest of her life.
I mean, to be fair, with the state of medicine at the time, the surgeon probably would have just used a penknife and a sewing needle as well. But you still got to give it to her.
But, the surgeon would have taken off her pants, right?
Yeah.
She was, of course, in all accounts of her life, everyone who's describing her circumstances also wants to describe her as part of an explanation of how she could have gotten away with this. And
it does seem tricky.
This is universally true, I think, of women that masquerade as men in combat, that they are able to portray themselves convincingly as men somehow. And it often requires that they have to bind their breasts, right? But they also have to adopt a masculine hairstyle and a masculine tenor.
Bad opinions about things.
That's right. There's a famous example of this is a woman by the name of Margaret Ann Bulkey, who joined the British Army. She was an Irish woman. She joined the British Army because she had taken a real interest in medicine at a young age, and her family all recognized that she was an extremely capable young woman, and they conspired.
Oh, they knew there was no other way for her to practice, so she had an uncle named James Barry who died,
and her family sort of let her masquerade as him. She put on an overcoat and some shoes with lifts in them.
So she's now really bulky.
And joined the army in order to go to medical school. And when she arrived at medical school, she was already 20 years old. But because of her size and her femininity, no one for a moment thought she was a woman. They thought she was too young. And she was, and there was all this scuttlebutt, a conspiracy that she was.
Like her voice hasn't changed yet.
Yeah, she had this high voice, that she was only 16 and that this was an affront. And several times in her med school career, she, she was at risk of being refused her degree because of her youth rather than her gender. But she went on to become an army surgeon who had an incredibly distinguished career in the British Armed Forces as a doctor. So much so that by the mid-19th century, she became the Inspector General of Military Hospitals for the British Army, a rank of general, and the second
general,
and the second highest ranking British medical officer.
If she's doing this whole thing in platform shoes, this is literally a high heels and backwards scenario where she's excelling in her field and the enormous strain of keeping up this charade.
And she, by all reports, was incredibly difficult to work with. In fact, no less a person than Florence Nightingale said that she was perhaps the worst and hardest doctor she'd ever encountered.
So she's really a method actor as far as being a man in the military.
But she was an incredibly gifted surgeon. She performed the first cesarean section in Africa where both the mother and child survived.
Wow. Makes you wonder how many asterisks are above that on the list.
And she had a patron. She lived for a long time with the governor of Cape Town, Lord Charles Somerset, who everyone speculates, and they were rumored at the time, accused of being in a homosexual relationship. And the relationship was investigated, and it turned out, the investigators let it slide, or said there was no truth to it. But so she had patrons who, the suggestion is that he knew.
That they must have known.
But she was sort of revolutionary in introducing hygiene into the British military in a time when that was still, somewhat novel concept.
It's the same today. If you have an all-male apartment and then you get one woman roommate, you're going to see the same. You're going to see the same pattern even today.
But in the case of Margaret Bulkey / Dr. Barry, she died still in the role of a man, and her true gender was not discovered until her autopsy. When she died, she and I'm using a female pronoun here, and I don't know what she would have preferred.
Right.
But when the good doctor died, they asked to be buried in their clothes and not even bathed, not have their body bathed.
She didn't want to leave any paper trails.
Just wanted this to go to the grave. And unfortunately, it was not, her requests were not honored. And so once the secret was discovered, there was some amount of hullabaloo until her doctor, or the doctor's doctor, Major McKinnon, when questioned about this, said that it was none of his business what gender the doctor was.
He's ahead of his time.
What gender the generals.
The phrase "that's none of my business" probably did not exist until the 1970s.
No, and it was pretty spectacular. I think even in its time, that was. This was a lot of these stories were covered up, and that story in particular, Dr. Barry's story, was covered up because of
the scandal for the military.
Scandal. What a suggestion that this could have even happened, let alone that this extremely prominent and important person.
There's the threat to the power structure, but also they would have been squeamish about the idea of a woman doing medicine on men and women. Like there's something untoward to them about that.
a woman in this same period in the same period as Deborah Sampson, and this is before Dr. Barry, a woman by the name of Hannah Snell. She joined the army because her husband, a Dutchman by the name of James Sumas, he'd left her pregnant and escaped into the military and abandoned her. And so her daughter died in infancy, and she put on a uniform and joined the military in order to find him, track him down.
Why is this not a movie?
And she did track him down and discovered that he had been executed.
Oh, that's why it's not a movie. There's no comeuppance.
Well, no, it's great because she then remained in the British military and was also wounded in battle, and then was discovered and made the rounds, did the talk circuit.
She was a celebrity.
Yeah, she opened a bar called the Widow in Masquerade. She made a living from it, and that is what happened for Deborah Sampson too. Deborah Sampson was taller than a typical woman, and even sort of a tall man for the era. She was 5'9".
Oh,
and so when she joined this 4th Massachusetts, she was actually in a light infantry unit, which was a kind of a commando squad. Like, they were faster and stronger than your average soldier, and because she was solidly built and tall, she was actually in this kind of the light infantry would run around a battle and try and get a flanking position on the enemy.
That's how we won the revolution, guerrilla tactics.
That's right.
They were just lined up shooting at things in big red uniforms.
It was the shot heard around the world. After the war, her identity was discovered, and at a certain point, she'd done some time as a kind of a personal adjutant waiter character for General John Patterson, and he became her patron when the truth was outed, and it was revealed she was a woman. General Patterson gave her an honorary discharge, and she left the service. Kind of most of the time, if a woman was discovered in this situation, she would suffer extreme penalties and prejudice. But in this case, the general had recognized her good service. And, we cannot know to what degree these were not open secrets, but perhaps the general suspected, or who knows who was taken into confidence in situations like this. It feels like for Dr. Barry to have pulled it off, not very many people could have known. But Deborah Sampson's...
There's not a lot of privacy in the military. I mean, the thing about people pulling this off in the military is the lack of privacy.
Yeah, to imagine...
In movies, there's always a salacious skinny dipping scene where the masquerading person gets caught out or almost caught out.
Or has to sit there and not join. And that has to happen. I mean, you have to go to the bathroom every day.
I do.
And
I don't know about the colonial times.
If there are 10 soldiers that all pull over to take a pee and one of them runs off into the bushes, there's got to be an excuse for it.
Irritable bowel syndrome has probably covered up so many of these cases.
But Deborah Sampson, unfortunately, after the war, again was not destitute, but married poorly, I guess. She married a man, like a local farmer. She had 3 kids with him, but they did not prosper. And so she appealed to the continental government, the new American government, for her pension as a decorated and wounded veteran.
Everybody else was getting a pension. She had not applied for one?
There were a lot of pension rebellion. I mean, a lot of soldiers had to fight for their pensions. But when she was given her discharge, I think it might have been considered extra bold to also demand back pay or demand a pension. But she eventually did and was granted it. and went back several times to the legislature, hoping to get her back pay, not just for her pension, but for the years that she didn't get her pension. And no less a person than Paul Revere intervened on her behalf.
Did he ride up at the last minute into court like a Perry Mason thing on his horse?
He rode up and he hit the local magistrate with a candlestick.
The sexual equality is coming. The sexual equality is coming.
But he rode on her behalf several times, and they carried on a lively correspondence.
Whoa!
And she became a figure of some renown. There is a statue devoted to her.
Some of this must be revisionist, right? 20th century women looking for antecedents and heroes in the past.
It's such a wonderful story that it had a history, that it was known in its own time, that Deborah Sampson she was on the talk show circuit, basically. Mm-hmm. And this was true also of Hannah Snell. They would come out and give a speech and then come out in their Army uniform.
Oh, right.
And do Army stuff.
There's a costume.
But there needed to be a corresponding narrative with both women, that they were women first, right? That they were good wives, that they were demure.
If Deborah settled down and had 3 kids, that's a mark in her favor.
And she could she could show her needlepoint and demonstrate to people that she was not some crazy cross-dressing. She didn't want to be a man. She just did this for our country. But it isn't just a 2000s revisionism. There's actually there's a U.S. During World War II, there was a Liberty ship named after her, the SS Deborah Gannett. So she's been accepted as part of military history. Yeah, and part of the American story. Her service was, she was wounded in combat, and she retired with honors.
It's interesting how, you've mentioned 3 of these cases. These are the ones we found out about.
Right.
The ones who were really good at playing male soldier got away with it, presumably.
Right.
We don't know how many of these there were that we just don't know about.
I mean, if you think about,
we're celebrating maybe the 3 that were worst at cross-dressing.
Well, I think that Dr. Barry probably did a pretty good job. But
she ran out the clock.
On reflection, Dr. James Barry lived as a man for the rest of his life and died preferring to died in his gender of choice. So I think it's pretty clear that, at least in that case, some of our other protagonists here, after they left the service, they returned to the traditional role of wife and mother and so forth. But in Dr. Barry's case, Dr. Barry lived as a man, and so probably would prefer, was known his entire life with male pronouns, and it's safe to assume would prefer to be addressed that way.
So you think you do know Dr. Barry's pronouns, even though he doesn't have them on a name tag or Twitter bio?
This is the kind of thing that it is tempting to be revisionist about. But in the case of Dr. Barry, he lived his entire adult life addressed with male pronouns and never sought to be known otherwise.
But what if that's only because of the oppressive society in which Dr. Barry found Dr. Barry's self? What if maybe it's a greater act of rebellion to say,
maybe, although probably not up to us. And also, true. I think there are so many instances where a person who had a fluid or ambivalent identity would have found opportunities in different directions. And this was very, very clearly that Dr. Barry lived not just as a man, but as an esteemed and, an esteemed personage in the British Army.
For decades. Even when he didn't have to.
Yeah. So I think, knowing as we do that there have been transgender people throughout history, and they're either living completely in secret or living completely in a state of like perpetual sort of gender agony. I think
closetedness.
Yeah, I think in this case, Dr. Berry probably was pretty liberated. But a lot of people die in combat and are buried where they fell.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll never know the true story of
it's possible that many armies of the past were 51% female. They were all masquerading, and they had no idea.
It's kind of like the scene in The Life of Brian.
That's right.
Stone him! Stone him! Stone him!
And that concludes Deborah Sampson, entry 1100.JG0512, certificate number 37232, in the omnibus. Futurelings, we don't know if you'll have social media. I mean, we don't even know if you'll have gender. It's increasingly unlikely you'll have social media. But let's say you do. Let's argue that for whatever reason, you have access to these social media platforms. You should use your abundant free time in your post-scarcity utopian future to look up at Omnibus Project, to follow at John Roderick on Instagram and Twitter, and at Ken Jennings on Twitter. You could email us electronic communication in our time at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. You could send us physical items through the increasingly embattled U.S. Postal Service at P.O.
Stand
Box.
up for your rights.
Are you singing to mail carriers?
I'm standing up. I'm standing up on behalf of the Postal Service with a little bit of a reggae vibe.
Yeah, that's the thing the Postal Service needs right now.
Mm-hmm.
Reggae.
More reggae.
That will save them on... Because things are not real irie right now for the Postal Service.
Boy, I'll say, I want to send a letter.
You could send those things using the Postal Service to P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington, 98155. We like getting mail. We're children, basically.
Yeah.
We're little children eagerly clapping by the mailbox every day, and we're sad when people don't bring us things.
Look, Ken, we got a letter.
For example, today, Genevieve from... Well, her postcard's from Melbourne, but this postmark is from Nebraska, so I think she's maybe a little stolen Australian valor here.
Yeah, what's going on?
But she sent me a postcard saying that she went to my high school in Seoul, Korea. And
The story gets weirder and weirder.
so she has childhood photos of me via the yearbook. She said she almost sent me the yearbook, but come on. I'm a yearbook editor. She thinks I don't have a full set of the Seoul Foreign School Crusader from 1982 to 1992.
So, do you have any of these pictures to share?
Yeah, I can put yearbook photos I'll put them on the Patreon.
This is high school yearbook.
Well, elementary through high school. It was a K through 12 school, so.
I see.
And she sent you a copy of apparently a book that she mentioned to you on Instagram. It looks like some kind of book that dads read on airplanes.
Oh, Tim Powers' Declare. That's the kind of book my dad loved to read on airplanes.
Yeah, it has a review on the back from the National Review, so you know it's a good, clean, male, sweaty spy thriller.
Shoot 'em up.
Of some kind. Thank you, Genevieve. I mentioned the Patreon. One of the perks for contributing to Omnibus financially is an image feed where you could see photos of our show notes, of weird things that listeners have sent us, odd ephemera like my yearbook photos, if I remember to post them. I'll just type a note to myself right now.
Dear Ken.
Dear future Ken. Because we're pretending it's the 4th of July, but we're just cosplaying. You and I are wearing our Continental Army uniforms, but it's actually April.
I wear my Continental Army uniform every Wednesday because I'm trying to get you to call me General.
And you're dressed as a woman in a Continental Army uniform, which is confusing today.
Well, not confusing today. It would have been confusing before.
Right. Now, once I knew the topic of the show, I was like, that's why John had me bind his breasts on the way in. This is all coming together. For at the lowest possible tier, John, if you contribute on Patreon, you get a monthly bonus addendum omnibus entry.
Tell us more.
A full additional hour approximately of omnibus content. So if this is not enough for you, we understand many of you are casual listeners and we appreciate your enthusiasm. But for a small devoted group, we appreciate your enthusiasm and your financial support because You are what guarantees the viability of this project. You can congregate with your fellow futurelings on the titular namesake Facebook page. There's also similar subreddits and discords and whatnot. Whatnot is a social media platform that I've just invented.
Whatnot,
Yeah, subscribe to my Whatnot. Don't forget to like and share.
Whatnot, and it's spelled what? WUTKNOT?
Yeah. It's got a K.
It's terrible.
Looks like the logo's a pretzel.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, when gender was just barely clinging to still being real.
We're on the last few weeks of gender even existing, and I don't mind it. I'll probably miss it when it goes because I can't do my Mary Poppins Sister Suffragette impression anymore.
What if you were going to live in a genderless world? How would you identify?
Well, if not having, I don't fall back on gender too much anymore. When people say, "Ken, what are you like?" I don't say, "Well, I'm a man."
Right.
First of all,
I'm a man.
I have a Y chromosome, baby.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably identify as.
You are a dad American, but anybody can be a dad.
Well, I would identify as a reader.
A reader?
I'm a reader American.
Aha.
I have books.
Reader.
Nothing's more depressing than shopping for a house in America today and going to open houses and just seeing what percentage of America does not have a bookshelf.
Not have a single book. Yeah. I don't know if I've ever told you the story, but when we were on tour one point with the band Carissa's Weird, and this was at a time when
I like bands that are full sentences. Good job.
Carissa's Weird, although weird is spelled incorrectly in the band Carissa's Weird, intentionally.
I know.
And their slide guitar player, Ben, went on to found the Band of Horses. So this is pre-Band of Horses, Carissa's Weird. And they used to drive, and their whole band culture was that they would drink vodka out of a plastic bottle, all 7 of them smoking cigarettes, and then they would drive through the night and cry. Our culture was that we would get to the venue early, and then everybody would pull their book out. And we were sitting in front of a venue in New Mexico or something, waiting for them to arrive because the venue hadn't opened yet. We were just parked out front, and they pulled up, all drunk and smoke pouring out of their car, and they looked at us, and we had all the doors of the van open, and we're kind of laying back. Everybody had their book, and they looked at us and rolled the window down, and somebody inside their van shouted, "Readers!" And it was the greatest insult, but also, we all looked at each other feeling a little humiliated, like, oh, we are readers.
But Band of Horses strikes me as as a thinking person's band.
Well, they were,
They grew up.
They were all thinkers, but yeah, Band of Horses is, Ben was a reader, also a drinker and a smoker and a crier.
He was a stealth. I guess identifying as a reader makes me seem like some kind of snotty
reader
snob. It's very effete.
Well, no, it's the drinkers, smokers, and criers that put that on you, Ken. Being a reader is nothing to be ashamed of.
Maybe I identify as a Dr. Pepper drinking American.
I'm sorry, Diet Dr. Pepper drinkers.
Yes.
Those of us that
I'm so straight edge, I will not drink sugary Dr. Pepper.
Those of us who are true peppers look askance at you trying to steal our pepper values.
You're like, I'm a pepper. Yeah. You're not a pepper.
I'm a pepper. You're a diet pepper.
Wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? But you're not.
Anyway, futurelings, we hope and pray that the catastrophe we fear may never come. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all the recordings, may have been our final word. But if Providence allows, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.